Back in the time when the first President Bush used the term New World Order, I think I probably sat upright and took immediate notice. And the reason was not necessarily that he had used the term, because I understood where it had come from. If you trace this idea of a new order back through all of the globalist organizations that have been founded in the course of the 20th century, Rhodes Scholarships, Council on Foreign Relations, all of these to promote some kind of an Anglo international order, they kept talking about this new order. What surprised me was that President Bush had used it publicly. And then, of course, everybody said, well, what does this New World Order mean? And somebody did some quick checking and found that the term almost exclusively was used by proponents of a global government. As a matter of fact, President Bush quoted other concepts from Alice Bailey, who died in 1948 and whose writings are still a major influence in organizations such as the Lucis Trust at the United Nations today. You know, last weekend, Secretary of State John Kerry delivered the commencement address at Northeastern University in Boston. He told the class that they are about to graduate into a complex and borderless world. And then later on in his speech, he said, quote, "Believe me, that is critical because you're entering a world where thinking globally is absolutely essential to seizing opportunities and confronting the challenges that we face," end quote. Now, what was interesting here was not the fact that Secretary Kerry had actually mentioned this, a borderless world. I just had to giggle that once again he went public and pop, out it came, the whole power elite that we've seen around the world, whose long rolling agenda to combine the world into a world government with a socialist base, capitalism has got to go, all ordered in a unified currency system, has long been a goal of the global dreamers. And again, what made me giggle was the fact that he said it out loud. And people don't quite understand what they're looking at. That's why there's all this confusion going on in Europe. What's with this borderless stuff? What's with the migrants coming in? What's with the chaos that's being caused? Let's go back to the days of yesteryear, and perhaps you will see where this trend of thinking has come from. Let's go back to one of Secretary Kerry's predecessors in the very same office. In 1939, future Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, delivered a speech to the YMCA. He stated, "There must be some dilution of sovereignty to the immediate disadvantage of those nations which now possess the preponderance of power." Wow, that was rather outspoken. That was an article carried in 1939 in the New York Times. In 1942, 6 years before the World Council of Churches was formally launched, its organizers within the Federal Council of Churches, which later became our current National Council of Churches, met at a conference at Wesleyan University in Ohio. There were 30 delegates, 15 bishops, 7 seminary presidents, and 8 college and university presidents. John Foster Dulles, again, the predecessor to our current Secretary of State, he became Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration, chaired the conference. And as head of the Federal Council's Interchurch Commission to study the basis of a just and durable peace. Remember, this is right in the middle of World War II, and they had to find something to do with the world after World War II. Dulles submitted the conference report, of which he headed. Here's what it recommended. Number 1, a world government of delegated powers. Number 2, immediate limitations on national sovereignty. Number 3, international control of all armies and navies. Number 4, a universal system of money. Number 5, a worldwide freedom of immigration. Number 6, a democratically controlled international bank. And number 7, even distribution of the world's natural wealth. Does any of this ring a bell? Isn't that what you're hearing today? And if this were just an isolated thing by one-time Secretary of State, you could chalk it off as a kook. But it isn't. It's a constant flow of ideas among all of the one-worlder think tanks that are out there, whose people are always in key positions of government. Even Henry Kissinger was talking about the need to abolish national sovereignty. Others have said we had to do end runs around national sovereignty to be able to forge together this new order or this new global governance or whatever the name happens to be today or tomorrow. That's the agenda that has been rolling forward. It's a multi-generational agenda, and it's still afoot. And when you begin to read what the elitists have been saying over the last 50 to 90 years, suddenly you understand what's going on in Europe, what's going on here and why it's so critical. But those steps, which were laid out by many luminaries, this long, rolling agenda, which requires a merger of the peoples of the world, the abolishing of borders, the breaking down of national sovereignty in order to achieve this merger. And that's what you're seeing play out right now. And one of the stages that the elites laid out was the breaking up of the world into regional alliances like the North America Free Trade Agreement, this free trade agreement, the European Union, which is why the Brexit right now and what the Eastern European countries are doing in protesting the migrant situation are threatening to break up this dream. That's why all of these organizations, Brookings and CFR and everybody, they're all screaming how terrible this will be. Their plan is under threat. Oh, and about our elections, I have to read this to you here. This is by historian Carol Quigley, history professor at the Foreign Service Schools of Georgetown University, a mentor of President Clinton, whom President Clinton honored in his acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention in July of 1992. In this book, he wrote, "The chief problem of American political life for a long time has been how to make the two congressional parties more national and international. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideas and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea, acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy." Well, that's what we're doing right now. We're debating over two rascals, aren't we? Yeah, we sort of are. We'll talk a lot about this next week. We have important things to do, however, this week. We'll be back. We're at SteelOnSteel.com. I'm John Lufter. The program is Steel on Steel.